Noctura might have vanished from the world, but they continued to stalk her mind. Nights became unbearable. She was afraid to close her eyes, afraid to sleep for even an instant, afraid that during a momentary lapse of vigilance they'd get her. Lying in bed, she could feel something watching her from the dark. In the dead of night, she'd hear footsteps on the landing outside her room. Those nights she'd sneak into Mitsue's room, as much as she disliked him. She'd slip under the blankets with him, listen to his slow, deep breathing. His presence made her feel better, his warmth against her reassuring. Sometimes she thought he woke up when she got into bed, but he never said anything. She was grateful for that. She didn't want him to know she was afraid. In the morning, she'd slip away before he woke. She wouldn't be weak. It was a Saturday at the start of summer when her father returned from Ignis. He'd been away at the academy in the Holy City for almost a month. Ray's mother had taken Mitsue clothes shopping, so Ray and the servants were the only ones there to greet him. She cherished these moments alone with him, hoarded them selfishly. He worked so much, and he'd seemed distracted as of late, dark bags hanging beneath his eyes. Ray wondered if it was her mother's cough, which had been growing steadily worse, that worried him. It certainly worried Ray. The day was clear and warm. They sat in the grass beneath the birch tree, moonlight filtering between the black leaves, making countless pinhole lights scatter and dance on the ground. A stillness seemed to lay over all the world. Bees droned in the nearby bluebells. Automobiles pushed air on a distant road. Otherwise, it was quiet. Ray lay with her head in her father's lap. He stroked her hair absent-mindedly with one hand, a book held open in the other. Ray amused herself by trying to catch the white fluffy seeds that bobbed on the wind at this time of year, reaching with her hand, contracting her muscles, her fingers closing in a cage around the seed. But she never could quite get them. They'd always slip through her fingers at the last second. Giving up, she watched her father read, his green eyes darting back and forth across the page, his brow furrowed slightly, his red hair tied back in a queue. It was his eyes that stared out of her head, his hair that fell to her shoulders, his nose, his chin, his mouth, she, like his reflection. So alike were they in appearance that strangers were always commenting wherever they went. That is, whenever he was home. If they could be said to differ at all, it was perhaps only in expression. Ray had inherited her mother's mannerisms, the shrewd squint, the molten glare, the petulant purse of the lips. The book's cover was of faded leather inlaid with a silver clasp. Her father freed his hand from her head and turned the page. "What are you reading?" Ray asked. "A book." He looked down at her and smiled, his face breaking into 1,000 diverging creases. She batted at his chin with her little fist, his beard grazing her knuckles. "I know that. What's it about?" "Things." Another smile. Ray frowned. She wanted to know the truth. "It's a book for kindlers, isn't it?" "Yes." "Kindlers are supposed to protect people from Noctura." "That's how the order began." She paused, thinking, then asked, "What are Noctura?" Her father set the book aside and mussed her hair up so that it stuck out in all different angles. "Stop that," Ray said grumpily. "I'm being serious." "Has your mother been filling your head with her stories again? You're too young to be worried about that." "No, I'm not. I'm almost 8. "Are you already? My little old lady." He tickled her belly. She broke into helpless giggles, rolling around, trying to escape his fingers, but it annoyed her to be ignored. "Stop that," she said, more abruptly than she meant to. He dropped his hands, his smile faltering. He looked into her eyes, and Ray wondered for the first time when he'd gotten so old. Not old, not exactly. Weary. The lines around his face were sharper, the light in his eyes dimmer. "I'm sorry," he said. "I forget how much you've grown sometimes." He seemed so terribly sad. Ray wished she hadn't said anything. "I forget that you won't always be my little girl." "I will," she said. He shook his head, the bearish shadow of a smile on his lips. "No, you won't," he said, and Ray felt as if a great distance had opened between them. She couldn't explain it, but she knew they'd passed some invisible threshold. She wanted to ask him what was wrong, but the words froze in her throat. So difficult to put into words how much she cared, to ball up her feelings and cast them into the wide open air. She was a child, nothing more. What consolation could she offer him? Later she would think back to that moment after her mother passed, as she and her father drifted slowly apart, as her father became a ghost in his own home, dinners passing in the empty clink of cutlery, spending all his time in his study or away on business. And she'd wonder if that's what it meant to grow up, to float away from the ones you love, like so many cottony seeds on the wind. Her trembling hand almost caught a seed, but at the last moment it swirled up into the black sky. "Do you really want to know?" he asked. "About Noctura?" "Yes," Ray said, sitting up eagerly. The bottom of his eyes fell away, revealing an immeasurable depth. He stared off into the distance, beyond their yard, over the rooftops, out across the city. What it was he saw Ray would never know, because just then their butler Harold brought a creme brulee in a ceramic dish, and her father took it, and then from his fingertip a jet of blood-red fire burned, and he caramelized the sugar on top. When he turned and handed her a spoon and offered her the dessert, his usual smile was back on his lips, the darkness in his eyes dispersed. Of it, she could discern only a lingering shadow. They ate together, their spoons clinking while the cottony seeds flew out to the ends of the world, asphyxiating in the airless black sky. He never told her afterwards about Noctura. Her mother passed a short while after that conversation, and then all the old questions had seemed only bitter disappointments, worse than pointless. One thing's for sure, Ray thought, remembering her father's fire scorching the top of the creme brulee. Noctura don't like fire. "Ray!" Mitsue's voice snapped her back to the present, back to the crowd pushing and jostling around her, back to the orphanage, back to the terror coursing through the air. He squeezed her hand.